Welcome to this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. I'm your host, Tara Woodlee with Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence. And today we have a wonderful topic for you. We're going to be talking about survivors and the issues that you go through with child custody. We have our wonderful volunteer, Crystal Behe, here with us. She volunteers in our engagement on social media and LinkedIn. And we also have one of my staff members here from Break the Silence. We have Amanda Johnson, and she is our volunteer director and community organizer. So let's just kick off the topic, kind of giving some background stories here for the audience. So Crystal, if you'd like to go first, just give us a little background about your story and what led to the custody issues with your children.
Well, I was in a abusive relationship. We were in the relationship for about 9 years, but it was only abusive for about 6 of it. The first 3 were, your typical building, I guess you could say. But about 4 years ago, it was Father's Day. I'd already tried to leave once, and he was in jail, and my daughter looked at me and said, "Mommy, it's okay if Daddy if Daddy hurts you as long as he comes home." No. So I made the choice to fully leave at that point to protect myself and my girls from him. I mean, that mindset is not good, period.
No.
Well, my anxiety at that point was so bad. You couldn't close a door hard without me having a panic attack. And yeah, my kids knew. They're smart little cookies, and they played on it. Well, there was a birthday party next door, and my elder daughter knew that she was allowed to go. But Lulu was napping. She was only 4 at the time, so we still had nap time, thank God. And so Maka went through the back door, through the yard, like she always does, and went over to the birthday party to play. Well, one of the people at the birthday party reported this to DHS, that my daughter was roaming the streets unsupervised, which was the farthest from the truth. But since they were there, I owned the fact that my mental health was not where it needed to be able to take care of my children properly. And I asked for help, because in my mind, the system was there to help somebody like me who's getting out of domestic abuse, who wants to be a good mom, but needs help.
Right.
Well, in a perfect world, that would have been what happened. But even though I jumped through all the hoops, I went through the drug counseling, I went through all of it. I went through the mental health counseling and everything else. I did everything right, but the foster parents were also approved for adoption and fell in love with my girls. And right name, right money, right connections. Whereas I was an outsider, and in the Midwest, being an outsider, yeah, forget it. Because during all this, I was going through the courses to become a life coach, to work with people like myself.
Right.
And everything else. I was standing up against it. I was being a voice. Oh, you're a victim of domestic abuse? Nope, you don't deserve your kids.
Mm-hmm.
So they went so far as even cutting a deal under the table with my ex, that if he was able to help convince the judge to terminate my rights as well, that they would let him off of probation 6 months early and not have to do the battery classes.
How horrifying.
I got him to admit to it once, because when I figured it out, I called him freaking out, and he laughed and said, "You're right. I told you the girls would never live at Matt's house." And then he backpedaled real quick when he realized he admitted it.
Wow, that is a lot to go through in just that little time period. That's a major
It was
impact.
it was a 2-year time period, and the day before I was told my rights were terminated, I had made the phone call to take my sister off life support. And they knew this. And they told me the next morning.
No, the system definitely in many areas is not equipped to help victims. So I'm glad you're telling your story, because it's important for other people because they're experiencing this themselves as well.
It's why
Yeah.
we do what we do, because we don't want other families to go through what I went through.
Amanda, do you want to give a little bit
Mhm.
of a background about your story?
Absolutely. So I've been fortunate enough where I did not have to go through a custody battle. My ex-abuser is incarcerated for fault of his own. Nothing that had to do with me or the children. So thankfully, we got a clean break with him being arrested and the charges because he is on Megan's list. So that gave me full control of my children. But prior to this, I can contest that I did not leave for years because of being afraid of my children. It was a little different for me because one of his manipulation tactics was I drive, I did not have a driver's license, and I have a job. Mm-hmm. What judge is going to give a mother her children who cannot get anywhere, take her children to appointments, go to a grocery store, and does not have a job? And he made sure all of those things were not accessible to me through our whole relationship. And that was more of my chokehold because I have called cops prior in fights. I have gone to shelters prior and everything. And again, nothing against the shelters. The shelters only have much resources and help that they get from their local states and everything. They did the best they could. But when you're going into a shelter that's just not a DV shelter and your daughter's taken out of her crib by someone you don't know and is walking around at your shelter with your newborn baby, holding her, you'd rather be back with your, as you said, Crystal, it seems a little bit more comfortable in the abusive situation than it does getting help. And that was the biggest chokehold for me for years. We did have an incident maybe a couple years prior to his arrest where he beat me up pretty bad. I was outside hiding from him because he said that if he caught me on our property, he was going to dump cold water on me. I was outside in 30-degree weather, just a t-shirt on underwear. He didn't even let me put clothes on before he dragged me out the door and threw me onto our porch. When the cops showed up, my children were inside, sleeping. And I was so happy because my best friend called because he called her, telling her, you need to come get your friend, you need to get her. And she knew of him for years. She knew his tactics and she wanted police there because she was an hour away. Not get there as fast and she was scared. That was probably the biggest mistake that she didn't know she made that night, because when the cops showed up, even though they found me outside, they threatened if they would come back, they were taking me and him both to jail and my children were going to be taken. And that was the scariest thing that it was. And I know for other victims, it only takes one time for that to happen for them to never call again.
Exactly.
And that was one of my biggest fears. I spoke to the women at the shelter. It only takes one time for a woman to be talked to that way by authority, because it's another man who's powerful. And you just want them to help you. And they were more so on his side. Like, they wouldn't even let me sit in the car waiting for my dad. The one police officer said, can we take her to the corner gas station and wait with her? No. They made me sit with my abuser for 45 minutes in my house before my dad got there. That, to me, is still scary to this day. And one of the big prevalence that I think that needs to be changed in domestic violence is the way we respond.
Oh, yes. And you would think after years, like my domestic violence incident was 25 years ago and further back. So it was back before the laws of somebody's going to go to jail, right? So you think we had come a long way since then with the creation of those laws, but we haven't. We really haven't. I mean, back in my day, it was that I only called once because the response was, well, it takes two to fight. He needs to go take a walk and let cooler heads prevail and it be done.
Be done.
And nothing to me really has changed that much in the system. So, Crystal, can you expand a little bit more about how you think the system kind of failed you in ways with your children? Because you said that you were hoping they would give you the help you needed because you knew your mental health after enduring everything you had experienced was compromised, but you just needed support from the system. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Well, when it came down to it, it took me a couple of tries, but during when all of mine was happening was COVID.
Right.
So
That's a bad time to have that, isn't it?
yeah. So that didn't help at all the situation. When it came to COVID and everything. So I'm having to find a therapist that I'm comfortable with that works remote because you can't do in-person therapy at that point in time. We were lucky with the girls' play therapist.
Right.
She actually did, but it took well, everything started in May or like June, and then the girls didn't get into therapy until October. The real kicker with what I was looking for support was the guardian ad litem was, and excuse my French, but an evil bitch.
Oh.
She straight up lied. When we first met and set out like the game plan, what I had to do to get my girls back. I had to get my license back. I had to get into drug therapy. I had to get into um, normal therapy. And I had all of those checkpoints done before the first court hearing. Thank God for Matt. I won't lie. I mean, he helped me pay off my license to where I had a valid license. So I had transportation because he had two vehicles. I always had accessible to a vehicle. We had a spare bedroom that we were setting up for the girls. But I was able to get the government kickbacks that they were doing during COVID. I don't remember what they were calling them, relief checks or whatever. So I was able to get them really nice bunk bed set, which Matt's sister is using for the boys. So at least it's being used, thank God. You know,
Right.
I was not getting the support. The foster mother, basically, I guess, was really good friends with the guardian ad litem, which that in itself is a conflict of interest. But they lied about me, which I showed them proof. I was like, no, I have a valid license. See, it's real pretty, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I am seeing a therapist. Now, I wound up having to switch therapists a couple of times before I finally found one that I was comfortable with.
Right.
And everything. But I did get in with the mental health and drug therapist. Ironically, my mental health and drug therapist wound up being the same girl. Because she did both, which was fine by me because I was very comfortable with her. I was very sad but happy when she actually moved to Arizona or Arkansas to set up her own thing. But I was not getting the support that I needed. The foster mom almost made it to where I had like she wanted me to move to Oskaloosa, which is where her and the girls were. Now that part is kind of understanding, except for one thing. I'm staying with my only actual emotional support, my only support system, my best friend. You know, we weren't dating at the time yet when it all started. We were just best friends. Why would you want me to leave where I feel safe to go and get an apartment alone where my abuser, when he gets out of jail, which he always did, ironically, always around my birthday, go figure, to where he can just bully his way back in,
Right.
guaranteeing that I can't keep my children safe. Well, I didn't do that. And that was another reason why I lost the girls, because I stayed where I felt safe.
It's uncanny that they make those kind of requirements. So Amanda, what about you? Like when you, I know when you left your abuse and had to go into a shelter, there were certain requirements and things that had to be done. How do you feel like those worked for you and maybe worked against you as well?
So everything that they did was for our safety and for, structure of the shelter, and certain programs that I had to do was like making sure that I kept up on my goals, because when they came in there, they wanted you to be able to be self-sufficient. They wanted you to be able to make it out with your children and to have an after care of where you were able to go into an apartment and find a job, which I was actually grateful to be chosen, because it was something that you had to be chosen to live in one of their apartments, and they paid for you. One of the things that happened during this time is there was a miscommunication between the organization and the housing community in our county, where they were somehow, again, and I don't know the implications of it or what happened. They were telling them that if these women live in your apartment for a while and they complete it and they pay their rent and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, then we will house them after that time. That didn't happen. I was working full time at a daycare. I could bring my children. I actually had to walk 20 minutes from the apartment at 6 a.m. for 2 years, with my children who were small at the time, to take them to daycare so they could get on the bus and go to school. And then they come back from school to the daycare, and I'd work until
Wow.
5. And we'd
Yeah.
walk home, and I was doing all this, and I was paying, what I needed to do. I was doing the classes within the shelter to keep up in the counseling, and kind of said, "You're homeless. We can't
Mm.
help you anymore." And that actually led me to moving a state away to live with my abuser's parents, because my family members were not willing to take me, and I had no other options.
Wow.
And it's very disheartening when you work up and live uncomfortable, because again, anybody will admit shelters are blessings, but they're not comfortable. They're not comfortable, especially when you have small children. And I lived there for months and did what I was supposed to do by them, everything that was asked. And again, my counselor from the shelter was mortified by this. They were very, I will never, they were a blessing to me. I will never speak badly about that organization, but the way that the miscommunication or whatever happened between that program was really disheartening. I mean, I literally had to move out within a weekend and had nowhere to go. I live in a hotel for 2 weeks because I didn't want to go to my abuser. I wanted to stay and keep my job, but I 2 weeks of living in, again, the kids loved it because we lived at the Hampton, and they have a pool, and like free continental breakfast, but I can't afford that. And it was like I was holding on to something, because again, that was not my first choice. I did not want to go live with my abuser's parents, but unfortunately, we find ourselves in situations that sometimes people will judge, but it's because of the system failing us in ways
Yes.
that we were told we were going to be taken care of. Just like you, Crystal, you were told, and thought they're going to take care of me. Even as a shelter, you thought you were going to be taken care of, and then things fall in the crack, and it affects people's lives.
Mm.
Major.
Yes, that's very well said. Well, we're going to take a slight break here to hear a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Thank you for joining us again here on Through the Eyes of Survivors. Again, we're here speaking with Amanda Johnson and Crystal Behe about what it's like to be a survivor of domestic violence and issues in the system that involve our children. So thank you, ladies. So with hearing the background of y'all's story and what it was like for the system, how do you believe your children kind of fared emotionally through the system as we were going through that experiences and stuff? So Amanda, if you want to start here, how do you think your children kind of took the situations and the scenarios of being in a shelter, homeless, that kind of thing?
I tried to make it as normal for them as I could, but I knew that it affected them because they lost. And it was more like grief for them because I found that when we were in the shelter, they were happy that we were safe, but we lost it from toys to beds to everything. Like I had no storage, nothing. So over the years, I have noticed that they really are sentimental to things that normally we wouldn't be sentimental to because they are so much more appreciative of certain things because of the way that the transition from having a home and a backyard and trampolines and bikes and and then nothing.
Uh-huh.
We when I went into shelter, I really wanted to make sure we lived in a small town and I was very lucky that we were able to walk in town. So when I had money, I would get them ice cream or try to take them out of the shelter as possible. There's parks everywhere. So when we were there, I always tried to keep things as normal as possible, bedtime routines to homework when they would come from school and stuff. Because again, I found that even though children are they're resilient and they will show up for you amazingly at times that you don't know how to show up because they can see mom's hurting, they can see things are different. But I have noticed that they are a little bit more sentimental and attached to things than some other children would be because again, it's that losing and afraid of losing. My daughter, because her father was arrested while he was with us. It was at 9 p.m. at night and it was SWAT. Wasn't a very peaceful arrest, so they watched it. So she watched her dad that she loved and was with from the day she was born be ripped from her. Had no clue this was going to happen and it was violent. So when I would have to put her on the bus at the shelter, she, for a good couple months, would scream and cry and have panic attacks because her fear was something was going to happen to me when she was at school and she was not going to be able, even though she wasn't able to stop it or see it or know it. And it really did change. Even now, they have a tracking app on my phone, like 360, where it shows if me and my husband are out grocery shopping because they're teens now. So we always don't have to be together, but she is consistently watching it because, again, they've lost a parent. Even though that parent wasn't the best parent, that was their parent, and it got taken from them abruptly. And that is where I've seen, the change of even with living in a shelter. They know how much can be lost at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. I know my oldest daughter still, even at 35, because of the experiences we had. She wants to know where I am, how I am, how everything because of our experiences. She is very much, my youngest daughter used to say, a mama monkey because she wants, it was so out of control and chaotic, that was her way of controlling it, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yes. So, Crystal, your experience is a little more different because the children being taken and into fostering care. I mean, while they were in the foster care process, and the adoption before that happened, were you able to see them, attend any kind of therapy with them? What was that experience like?
From that June when they were taken up until January 9th of 2022, I was very active in their life. And I still try to be. The foster parents, well, adoptive parents don't allow me in, but I still send them flowers. I still send them birthday cards. I'm still as active as I can be,
Right.
from afar. But before that, yes, I went to all the therapy appointments. I went to doctor appointments. I had my weekly visit with them every week. And play therapy is a wonderful thing for children. It a lot better than like the therapy that you and I go through.
Right.
As adults, yes, we can sit there on the couch, I guess you would say, and be able to talk if we're willing. Yeah, therapy goes both ways. You have to be willing to do the work for it to work for you.
Mhm.
But for children, play therapy is a lot more comfortable. They are more willing to open up. I will give their foster mother that she got them into a very amazing play therapist. And one of the things, like Amanda was kind of saying with my girls, was my elder daughter, she was the mommy.
Mhm.
Her dad, whenever he knew he was going to jail or something, he would tell her, you need to help mommy, you need to, you know basically take my place. And that was part of the problem, was that she didn't listen. She felt like she was the one that was in control and things like that. So when it came down to it, she and thankfully it happened during one of our play therapy sessions. We were talking about where they wanted to live when daddy got out of jail, things like that. And Maka looked at me and she goes, well, I think Lexi should live with you. I want to live with you, but I think I can help daddy. I can fix him. She was 7.
Right.
And both the play therapist and I both put a squash to that real quick. We were, no, 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 honey. It is not your job to fix him. It is your job to be a kid and to play and to learn and to grow. She's like, oh, well, then I want to be a chef like you, mommy. The resilience of children. But
Well, isn't it amazing how they want to take on that role like they feel responsible?
she wanted to fix him. She wanted him to be okay. I
Mhm.
think she felt that if she could fix daddy, because for a long time we were telling him that daddy was sick.
Right, because they can't understand the dynamics of what's really happening with their father.
Yeah, she knew that he was in a place for bad people, but that he was sick. And I to this day feel that it's very true. Mental health is but some people can choose whether they want to fix it or they want to embrace it, embrace the darkness, I guess you could say. And he's one of those that embraced it instead
Right.
of wanting to change and become healthy and, maybe get his family back. At that point in time, I was done. But for the first 2 years, every time I would report him for being abusive and everything, I would beg the courts. I literally begged them to put him into a drug and mental health rehabilitation center instead of just giving him probation and a no contact order. I begged and they never did it. Do I
Right.
think that maybe if they had the first time I'd reported it, that if he'd actually been forced to go to the 90 days, 6 months, whatever, that things would be different? Maybe. Don't know. And frankly, that's the past. I don't live there anymore. I'm very happy where I am. Yes, I miss my children every day, but I'm happy where my life is. My partner is my best friend, and I have a healthy relationship now. And that is one thing that I want that my girls do see.
Absolutely. It's important for them to see that. And I think too, isn't it always, I think sometimes the system, I think all three of us can speak to that, where system and people around you and stuff expect that when you kind of advocate for that person to get healthy or something, the people seem to think you want to get back in that relationship. And it's like, no, I need him to be healthy for my children. My children are the issue here, not myself. We are not going to repair that relationship between us, and there is no going back, but you still have to parent with this person. Even when they're in jail, there's aspects of you've got to deal with them, and they are, they're still your children's father, and your children innately feel that connection. And they need that connection with that parent if they could be healthy. And if they can't, then we're left with the consequences of picking up children's lives who, in the back of their head, going, I somehow am a part of whatever this was that dad hurt mom. I have these certain tendencies because I'm like dad and I do this and I do that. And it would be just so much better if the system could help them and help us to be healthier people for the sake of the children. But that's not how it works. Absolutely doesn't. Um, so, Crystal, like when you were begging them for that kind of help and stuff, what was their reactions really at you as far as that?
Didn't care. In the very beginning, yes, I did want to repair my relationship with him. I loved him. I didn't, I had two beautiful children with him. I was very codependent,
Right.
even though I was the one that worked. He was the stay-at-home parent, not me. Which was another reason why the girls just did not behave for me. He undermined me in everything when it came to it. But when I begged, that's what made it harder when the girls were finally taken, because he convinced them, and this was part of how he was able to get my rights terminated, was that my relationship with Matt was all a front to get the girls back. When that's the farthest from the truth. If that was the truth, why would I still be with him 4 years later, happy, trying to maybe have a baby if God willing, things like that. Why would I still be here?
Right.
If it was all a farce. When he got out of jail, I could do, at one point, when my sister passed away, I had the money for me and him to be fine, me and my ex. If it was all a farce at that point in time, why wouldn't I have gone back to him? But they used my sister passing away. They used every little thing that they could against me, down to even falsifying drug tests. In 40, I believe it's 47 states, and the FAA will not acknowledge a sweat test. It's a patch that they put on your arm as a valid drug test. That's what they used for me. You can eat McDonald's and it comes up positive for methamphetamine.
Right.
Guess where I would always go after I would get the patch? McDonald's right across the street, because it was a 35-minute drive home.
Right.
So I'd pick up McDonald's on my way home. I'd grab McDonald's on my way in. Didn't have a whole lot of decent fast food in our area. So, and when you're doing these drives, what are you thinking? Usually you're hungry or something. Even if it's just fries and a shake.
Yeah, it's terrible what they do in our food, but that's another topic. I could talk on that one for a long time, but
that's what I'm saying. Like, the system, when it came down to it, I'm begging them, because he has a known methamphetamine problem, to put him in rehab and everything. And they had the spots. They had it.
Right.
They just didn't care.
That seems to be the way, the tie that binds, no matter where you live in the country, is finding people who actually care about your situation. And there are people out there, but the system as a whole is not designed for it. Amanda, what about with you and your children, as far as like the connections with your father and their father, and the kind of help that you were trying to receive, or even trying to get for him before you found out what he was doing and had to go to jail?
In all honesty, he took anger management classes 3 months prior because of being on probation with my father. 2 years earlier, I was living with my parents for a short period of time. This was actually after the incident I just spoke about, where a cop came and threatened to take me to jail. I moved in with my parents for 4 months. And I'm going to be honest with you, I love my parents, but that was not the best place for me to go either. It was a very stressful time. I think my mom took on more than what she knew she was taking on. As a mother, we react, and she reacted to the situation and grabbed us and ran. But there was not a lot of resources to help me to get me an apartment. My mom would say, "There's all these resources out there, Amanda. Why aren't you taking them?" And it kind of humbled her a little bit, because I'm living in her house with all her grandchildren, and these resources aren't popping out of the woodwork for her like she thought they were going to.
Right.
And during this time, me and him were co-parenting. So he was not in jail. He was a free man living his life, dating some younger girl, hanging out with a younger crowd, and wanted to come pick up my kids on the weekend. And he showed up one weekend. He was mad at me because I was not coming back to him. I was dating someone else. And actually, the guy I was dating was at my house with my parents. And I kind of had him go back because I didn't want any kind of issue during our trade off. I did not want him to, there was no need for him and my boyfriend to be seeing each other at that time. But at the time, he asked for all of me and the kids' Social security cards to do to tax return. And my mom came out the door and said, "Amanda, he does not need any cards for that. You can send it to him in text for him to do his tax return." And he went verbally off on my father, and him and my father got into an altercation. Um, and he was put on probation. My father did not press charges, but the state did. Um, and he had to do all of this stuff because he was a first time offender. So they let him off on this kind of like what they call a, rehabilitation program, where you have to do 18 months of, and he did counseling and everything, but he paid the counselor off. He just had to watch some Tony Robbins videos. Nothing had to do with domestic violence, or actually, it was more self help. And he got a certificate. And then went to jail 4 months later.
Ooh, that was a big help, wasn't it?
We had to pay $3,000 of our own money for him to get off probation, just for him to go back to jail.
That is really disheartening.
It does sound about right. I actually am having in the summit that I'm doing next month for domestic abuse, I am actually having a Broward County Sheriff's officer who works in the domestic unit as one of the speakers. And he's speaking as a officer and a father on exactly this, because there are officers that do care.
There is. And sadly, the one that was trying to get me to go to a gas station, he was the only one, and he was outnumbered by 5 different cops. And he seemed like he was younger, and I felt bad because I feel like he didn't want to get yelled at by his, head up. So he kind of backed down. But it's just there's not enough together.
Exactly. And that's part of why he's willing to speak, because so many of us are scared to call the cops because of exactly what happened to me. What happened with you, Amanda, like you said, Tara, you guys just need to take a walk. When a friend of mine had actually called the cops for me, like your friend did, when my ex did this one with a TV remote control to my face. I sent them a text because they kept calling, and I was like, "Everything's fine, don't call the cops." Now, that's not something I said. So what do?
Oh.
And that cop actually did care. And when he saw that, he was like, "Are you okay? What happened?" And I made up a story because my ex was right there, that I didn't realize one of my cabinet doors were open, and I hit my head. And he put my ex on the patio, and he looked at me and he's like, "Is that the story that you want to stick to?" And verbally I said yes, but I was shaking my head, giving him the signal of, I can't talk. So the state pressed charges for me.
That's good.
That's good. That's good.
You know, he understood the signals that I was giving, because I couldn't verbally, without fear of retribution, when he did get out of jail. And they always do. But there was only two in that entire sheriff's office that actually cared. You know?
And that's the difference we really need as well in these situations. So we're going to take another quick break right here and have another word from our sponsors, and then we'll wrap up this episode with my guests, Amanda and Crystal. Well, welcome back to Through the Eyes of Survivors. I'm talking with Amanda and Crystal about important issues on our children and survivors as well. So, Crystal, with all the experiences you've had and with the system and with your children, what do you feel like would be the greatest issue as a society we could address to help survivors that are in similar situation as you went through?
Honestly, my biggest thing is the victim shaming. I really feel that if we could make society as a whole understand that it's not our fault. We didn't ask for it. And most times we didn't even do anything to deserve it. I'm
Right.
sorry, dinner's not ready. Dinner was supposed to be 5 minutes ago. I'm sorry that I had to change our daughter's diaper, and that's what held it up. But that doesn't mean that I deserve to be berated or hit or anything like that. And I think that's part of the biggest thing when it comes to dealing with the system, is because so many people feel like the victims are to blame, that the ones at fault, so that they don't deserve to be a parent, even though most of the time all we're trying to do is protect our babies from seeing it, from being hurt, from any of it. So if we can shift the mindset of blame and actually want to help moms or dads, because let's face it, abuse can go both ways.
Oh, yeah.
Women can abuse just as much as men, and mental abuse is 1,000 times worse than physical abuse. I'm sorry. It really is. Mental abuse, and that's where most men are, is financial and mental. They're not physically abused most times. But if we can shift that mindset and want to help the survivor instead of keep re-victimizing them by taking their children, by making them feel like they don't deserve to be a parent, that would be my biggest thing. Shifting that mindset is what I think would help. Honestly.
Yes, I agree. I feel the system compounds the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
They put layers upon layers upon layers of that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of helping to de-escalate and do everything they can to mitigate as much trauma as possible when it comes to children in these systems and women and or any victim in these situations, the system seems to be rigged to add to the trauma to a point of it can lead some victims into, instead of being able to get out and be survivors, that they become so broke that we have so many broken people out there who just need healing. They just need somebody who understands them. And that's my personal, take on what society needs to know about these situations and what we can do about that. What procedures can we put in place, or even just the common human decency when we deal with one another in these situations, whether it's a psychologist or your cop or your healthcare worker or whoever in the system is helping you, to not add and compound to the trauma as we go through all these things would be the greatest help for a lot of people in these situations. Amanda, what about with you? What do you think as far as the system that you feel could have some great changes?
Again, just making sure that we are for the victim more than for the abuser, to have better place things in set with first responders, people who are in the front lines doing this, train better, have them do workshops that shows the body movements, just as, Crystal was saying. A woman's not going to sit there and out her abuser. She's going to lie, but her body language is going to tell you everything.
Exactly.
And you also have to watch the male, because the male can manipulate with her with just a look, just the slam of a door. There's things that he's been doing to manipulate her. You've got to treat these women just like you would if you found someone kidnapped. The Stockholm Syndrome is big in domestic violence. And I understand it is frustrating when you don't have the understanding of what that's like, and you come in and you're trying to help these women and they don't show up to court, or they back out on certain things. But if they have more support from the beginning to the end, they're going to stick through it. But the moment that they're discredited, it hurts their chances of getting out safely.
Absolutely. And how do you think that part of the system affected your children? How do you think that could improve?
It makes them untrustworthy of authority. You want your children to go to cops, especially for not even nothing the DV related. You want them to trust authorities. And then when they're watching mom go to authorities and they're yelling at mom, they don't feel safe, because then mom's not being protected. How am I supposed to be protected? And then these children are not going to trust cops. And then that's going to make an air of disrespect for the younger generation. And we don't want that. We don't.
Well, it opens the door for when they become adults,
right,
to have very similar situations. We talk about that generational stuff all the time. So you're compounding it, because if they are, even in the slightest situation, they don't trust the authorities to be called at this time. So you're compounding again, I think the system adds to the trauma and creates future trauma and generational trauma. And that is just huge to overcome. Do either of you ladies have some final thoughts that you'd like the public to be aware, starting with you, Crystal?
Honestly, I agree with just how we interact with each other. If you see something that feels off, just offer a little bit of kindness to that person and just say, hey, if you need anything, just reach out. Like my coaching clients, we have a code that if they need help, they text me one word and their location, and I have help to them within 5 minutes, maybe 10, depending on if they're in a rural area or things like that. But I send help. When you're in that situation trying to get out, the one thing that I do recommend is planning your exit. There are times where you have to flee and you don't have the chance, but if you can, plan your exit strategy to be safe and efficient for both you and your children. Because without that, 9 times out of 10, we wind up being that statistic. The statistics show that it takes 7 times most of the time for somebody to fully get out. Granted, yes. I beat the statistic, thankfully. It only took me twice. But not everybody has a mat like I did. I was very blessed to have my best friend support me, but not everybody has that support. So reach out to organizations like ours who can hopefully get you the resources that are in your area.
Right. Yeah, we'll do a shameless plug there, Crystal, because you help with our support lines.
I do work with the support line, and a lot of times the women that call, they aren't looking for resources. They're looking for exactly what we were just saying. Somebody who gets it. Somebody that can empathize and believes them. And just a little bit of guidance. More, I have to say, 3 out of 5 support line calls that I've answered have not needed resources. They've just needed someone who believed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amanda, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I know it's hard being in a situation where you feel there's no way out and that people don't believe you and that you're not getting the resources that you feel you need. But there is help out there and there is a community out there. Again, like Crystal said, our organization and might take a moment, but there's people that believe you, and just be your best advocate you can be, because again, you know what's best for you and your children, and don't let anybody else tell you.
Absolutely. So thank you, ladies. And Crystal, I know Crystal's an author. So Crystal, do you want to just real quickly kind of plug your book for the audience? And we'll have all her information and our links below. So please check those out. But yeah, Crystal.
So I have written a solo book called Rise of Crystal Phoenix, which is my short story of through domestic violence. It's funny, half of the book is actually my story, and then the other half of the book is resources, not, online resources and phone numbers to call for help. And right now I am publishing a anthology series of 3 books, giving you guys a chance to share your stories. I already shared mine. Now it's your turn to take back your power and share your stories. And the first book is about the kids who went through it and made the choice as an adult. I'm going to break the cycle of abuse. I'm not going to allow myself to be abused or abuse others, because that's a coin flip. Honestly, it can go both ways. You can either turn into the abuser or not. The second book is your traditional survivor stories, and the third book is angel stories. And the proceeds, 75% of the proceeds are actually going to be donated to Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, because I do believe in our organization, obviously, or I wouldn't be volunteering with it for as long as I have been. So that will, God willing, I'm still waiting on a couple of authors to submit their forms, because we all know writers.
Yes, absolutely.
God willing, it will be published Thanksgiving weekend. The series. That's what we're hoping for. In fact, one of our own is going to be writing a chapter. Amanda Molliker is writing a chapter for me. So
that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Crystal. And thank you for listening to this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. Please always check us out on our website, www.breakthesilencedv.org. And we have an area up there on the website in which you can share your story. It doesn't have to be a whole book, just to get it out. And you can submit your stories there on the website. So we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you.